Hello, everyone, and welcome to America's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Ed Denzel. I hope you all had a great weekend. I got a lot done this weekend. It was beautiful. So I got to go out and throw the discs a little bit, getting ready for my tournament that's coming up Labor Day weekend in Orlando. I'm hoping to play better than I did the last couple years over there. Last time I played well in that tournament was in 2013, 2014, 2015 were pretty bad. But it was some nice weather here, so I had an opportunity to get out and do that. Although it was hot, I think the heat index was 101 degrees, which means I usually wait until late evening, 6:30, 7 o'clock. I get out there, and I play and I throw until virtually it's dark, until I can't even see the discs flying through the air. So I usually get a good hour and a half probably in of throwing as long as I wait till that time. If you go out during the day and play, you can't keep throwing. You can play disc golf if you're just playing a course, like one throw, you walk 300 feet, another throw. But if you're doing what I'm doing, which is throwing disc after disc after disc in succession, and then walking to where there are, and then throwing them back the other way, like in a field where there aren't, it's not a course. You can't do that out in Florida heat. Not in August, not in June, July, August weather. That'll wear you out very quickly. It'll dehydrate you very quickly. So I have to strategically pick when I go out and practice. And that doesn't matter. I mean, I'm 46 years old now. I don't even think about it. You could be 20 years old, and I think it would still be very difficult on a man or a woman to do that. So I have to wait to the late evening to do that. Although I may get out and throw a couple courses before I go over to Orlando to play. But other than that, got some writing done. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I wrote an article for the New Americana. Watched a little bit of the Olympics online. My Pirates stunk this weekend. Just getting some things prepared for some of my other shows. And before I get into this, maybe I should remind you that you can email me at edwarddenzel@reagan.com. You can follow me on Twitter, USA Podcast. You can go to Amazon, download my books, my science fiction books. And I do have this other book I've talked about before called The Comebacks. It's kind of been put on the back burner, being that I've gotten into some other things, and I'm still trying to find a literary agent. And speaking of other things, I have my Unfound podcast coming out in a couple weeks, so I'm excited about that as well. So now we have that out of the way. You can go to newamericana.com. That is the site that is trying to take over where the Drudge Report has gone wrong. As I've told you, I haven't been to the Drudge Report since February, maybe. But I go to the newamericana.com site every day. And I'm fortunate enough to be writing there now. I'd written an article for them the beginning of this month about Rhyme of the Modern Conservative. You can still find that on the site. And then, I was in Pennsylvania seeing my parents and come back, and there was some things going on here that I need to take care of, and finally found some time this weekend to write another article for them. And it's titled Will of the People. And for those of you who are old to the show, you know that if you read the article, and I urge you to go read it, you'll see some familiar themes from the show there in that article. And I draw the analogy to a sports team. They're fans who are very sports astute, who play fantasy football, watch or read the blogs that cover, for example, NFL football. Maybe they play Madden and they're used to designing plays. Maybe they've coached football themselves. Maybe many of them have played football. Of course, the men have played football in college very well. But still, NFL teams, the general managers, the owners, the coaches, do not take recommendations from their fans. They don't take tips from their fans. They don't take play suggestions from their fans. Why is that? Is it because the fans don't know anything? That's possible. It's possible. Really, the reason that NFL teams don't take, and this goes for baseball, basketball, any other sport, by the way, don't take recommendations from their fans is, first of all, the people who are in those positions in a sports team know that they're in there to do a job, and they know that if they don't do it, they get fired. Second of all, I think these people who have been in sports management, sports coaching for all these years realize that sports fans can be very, very fickle. And in the end, it's going to be the coach or the general manager that pays the price for the team winning or not the fans. And so these people don't want to stake their careers on the whims of others. So there's a lot of different reasons, but most importantly, the most important thing to remember is, despite sports fans being, I think, pretty astute about the game and how the game is played, when it comes to the tactics and the strategy, I'm not so sure that they have what it takes. And teams, sports teams and owners, the rest of them, know it. And how do you draw the correlation to politics? And what I say in the article is the reason that conservatism has gone bad is because we have embraced the idea of the will of the people. It would be no different in sports if an NFL team on every play took a poll of the fans in the stadium. What should we do next? What play should we run next? On 3rd and 2 from our own 35, should we throw it or pass it? And if we're going to pass it, what play should it be? If we're going to run it, what play would it be? What kind of team do you think that would end up being? I think that it would be a team that goes 0-16. But we know sports teams don't do that. In politics, it's kind of the same thing. Even though we have a system of government where the people are supposed to be the leaders, we know that in many cases, people's opinions are wrong. And how do I define wrong? And instead of it just being some subjective thing, well, I'm a conservative, so liberals must be wrong. Well, I'm a liberal, so conservatives must be wrong. I think we can just look at what the people have wanted and gotten over the last 50, 60 years and look whether it's been bad or good. It's very simple. You don't even have to go to the Constitution for that. But believe it or not, despite what many other conservatives will tell you, what Donald Trump will tell you, what Hillary Clinton would tell you, what any populist would tell you, pretty much the American people pretty much get what they want. Not 100% of the time, but definitely more than 50% of the time. And this is what you get. You get $18 trillion of debt. You get a growth rate that hasn't surpassed 3% since George W. Bush was in office. And we could go on and on and on. And that's the point that I make in this article. And unfortunately, we as conservatives have gotten caught up in that saying. Here's what I know. Although I don't scour liberal websites every day, you don't hear much on the left about the will of the people. In fact, I realize it's like the extreme opposite on the liberal side. They just want to continue to govern from the absolute top down, force feed people stuff. They don't worry about the will of the people. They don't. They give it to them, whatever they want. If it's something that the people want, that the liberals don't want to give them, they just don't do it. If it's something conservative that the will of the people want, liberals don't do it. If it's something liberal that the people want, then liberals will go through any sort of path to get it done. But it's definitely much more a top-down type of situation on the left. than it is on the right. The problem is, I think that we as conservatives, we've gone too far the absolute direction, saying that what should be the will of the people, will of the people, will of the people. This is what the people want. What if the people are wrong? And that's something that we as conservatives don't talk enough about. Why? Because we, I guess me now, being a talk show host, and all of those people who have led us for the last 2 decades consider themselves to just be regular people, even though we know they're not. They just want to be one of the gang. They want to be seen as part of the grassroots. So they identify with the common man and woman by saying the will of the people. The average American wants this. Well, it's amazing to me that none of these conservative leaders in the last 20-some years has ever come out and said the courage to call their listeners, their viewers, and tell them, you know what, you're wrong. Even on a topic like abortion in this country, it's the will of the people regarding that topic is very, very split. It wavers, as I've called it before, it's trench warfare. It'll go a few points this way, a few points back that way. Now, on something like partial birth abortion, the most extreme version of abortion, then yes, the public is not split. The will of the people, a majority of them think that that's wrong. But just your average abortion, like within the first month or 2 of a woman getting pregnant, you know what? The country is pretty much split. Although, like I said, it may go 5 points this way, then 5 points that way. Depending on the poll, who's doing it from year to year, and who's president, and whether it's a topic or not, whether it's a big topic or not. So the will of the people is not clear-cut on that. Social Security. You know what the will of the people is for Social Security? People want more money. Doesn't matter that we're stealing from future generations to pay generations from now. People who are getting security want more. That's the will of the people. And dare you poll people who are on the verge of being eligible for Social Security? They hope their checks are more too, even though we're broke. And there's a lot of conservatives who think that way. But it's through all of this that I think that the door was opened for Donald Trump. See, I think when Pat Buchanan, as a populist, which this is all that this is populism. Populism is just giving the people whatever they want. Majority wants something, they should get it. Majority rules, that's all populism is. And it's something that our founding fathers were totally afraid of. Even more afraid of that than some dictator. They're much more afraid of a majority rule than just some guy ruling from the top down. But the time wasn't right when Pat Buchanan was around 92, 96 in his populism nationalism views. And that's the exact reason that I've really never considered him a conservative, and I've never liked him. But after all these years, after all this conditioning that conservatives have had done to them about the will of the people and how a majority of the United States is being ignored, which isn't necessarily true, you get a guy like Donald Trump who sees an opening and he takes it. And guess what? We shouldn't then be surprised, I guess, the conservatives go right along with him. Because conservatism over the years has been twisted. It's gone from a set of principles, no matter if they're popular or not, no matter if they're embraced by 51% of the people or not, at least 51% of the people or not, to whatever the people want, that must be conservative. And through all of that, you create a bunch of sociopaths, know-it-alls, who don't believe that they're ever wrong. In fact, as I state in my article, just because you call yourself a conservative and you hang with conservative, and I tried to keep the wording short on the article, but here, it's my time. But to go further into the statement that I make, and the statement that I make in the article is just that just because you call yourself a conservative doesn't mean what's in your head is conservative. I would expound on that by saying just because you call yourself a conservative and you hang out with other people who you think are conservative and you've contributed conservative causes doesn't mean that every idea that comes into your head is conservative. Instead, what you should do is every time you have a political issue, idea come into your head, you should really examine it and really determine, is it conservative or not? Take 30 seconds. Take a minute. But I think what we've done is we've created, over the years, not me personally, but we've created a condition where people who call themselves conservatives, they think any political idea that comes into their head is conservative. That's how over the years you've actually had conservatives convince themselves that universal health care and single payer and Romney care is actually a conservative way to go. Yes, you can go back and check that from 15, 20 years ago. Articles written about that. So it's very easy for us to be led astray. And as I end the article, and once again I urge you to check it out at thenewamericana.com, is that my belief is that if a sports team were to run itself just by whatever its fans want, it would be broke and it wouldn't win any games. And I said, sounds like conservatism these days. Doesn't it? Now, see, the tough part is, where is that fine line? Because we have representative government, does that mean that our representative, if it's a representative, if it's a senator, if it's a president, are they supposed to do what a majority of the people want, even if that representative, that congressperson, that senator believes it's wrong? It's very difficult kind of to find out. I realize the politicians, many of them run on lies. They run on unfulfilled promises. They guarantee the world and seldom deliver and everything. But I'm telling you that on the other hand, I'm sure that when they wake up every day, their ideas clash with their constituents' ideas. I'm sure that's happening every day, not just in Washington, D.C., but in every city capital of every state in this union. And it's a very fine line. And I think what eventually happens is that you have too many politicians who just go along with whatever their voters want. And a lot of people will tell you that's the way it's supposed to be. I'm standing here telling you that's not the way it's supposed to be. Even though I know it's difficult to the contrary. But, in our country, there are way more non-politicians than politicians. So it's easy for all the non-politicians to pick on the politicians. Well, you know what? Most of these politicians are just doing what their constituents want. You know how I know? Because most of them just get reelected every 2 years and every 6 years and every 4 years. That's how I know. This leads me to the second part. I mean, like I said, you can check that out at thenewamericana, all one word, .com. Will of the people, and I appreciate the people who run that site. The picture that they put along with the article is a picture from The Simpsons, all of the characters with pitchforks, torches, and pitchforks as the picture for that, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, and I appreciate them. That's a perfect picture for the article. But while I was doing some work this weekend, I had playing on my computer episodes of Deep Space Nine. It's amazing. I'm a Star Trek guy, and used to work there years ago, but just within the last few months, I've discovered how many of the Deep Space Nine episodes I hadn't seen. And I think I've seen them all, but some of the first seasons are just a little weak, and I still insist that the episodes where the Ferengis, Quark, Rom, Nog are featured are the best ones. Never did I think I would ever say that, because in the Next Generation, the Ferengi were not written well. In Deep Space Nine, they're written very well. They're funny, but they're good plots when they get featured. So that's nice. And of course, the Ferengis don't play a big part in Voyager, except for, I think, one episode or so. But there's an episode towards the end in the last season, season 7, called Tacking into the Wind, which is a saying that comes from sailing, where a sailboat, of course not being powered by any sort of propeller, has to go into the wind. Well, how do you go into the wind when you're a sailboat? Well, it's called tacking. You go like at diagonals. You go diagonal one way for a while, and then you turn the rudder, and you go the opposite way, and you just have to look it up. Look it up on Wikipedia. But it's not easy to do. That's what the episode's called. But in there, Ezri Dax, who's the new version of Jadzia Dax for Season 7, is talking to Worf. And there's a problem because Gowron, the leader of the Klingon Empire, is of course already in power, is already leading, but he is destroying the Klingon Empire, destroying the Klingon military by going off and having his birds of prey attack the Dominion, the enemy, in odds where the Klingons are going to absolutely get decimated. And it's obvious to everyone, Worf included, that Gowron is doing this, first of all, to embarrass this one Klingon general, but also he's hoping that Gowron is hoping he can win the war on his own so he can have all the glory for himself. Even though the Klingons are supposed to be allies with the Federation, with the Romulans, and everybody else fighting the Dominion, the Breen, the Shapeshifters, the Jem'Hadar, and the Cardassians. And the Cardassians eventually flip over, by the way. Go to the good side. And Ezri Dax tells Worf, because Worf is really bothered by this. Worf is a Klingon going way back to the Star Trek and the Next Generation days. And she says, you might as well just let the Empire die. If you, the most honorable man I know, this woman is telling Worf, you, the most honorable man I have ever known in my life, and you're continuing to support Gowron, then I just don't think it's worth the effort to keep the Klingon Empire alive in its current form. It might as well just die. When people of good honor are going to support a guy like Gowron just because they're supposed to. Now, I'm going to ask you, does that sound like anything going on in American politics right at this second? In watching that episode, and I've watched that episode many times, I'm going to say that I've seen that episode 10 times, and probably at least 3 or 4 times within the last 4 months, because I tend to play seasons 5, 6, and 7, because they're the best ones over and over and over, just when I'm hanging out around the house doing stuff. But it's obvious to me that that Donald Trump is Gowron. Donald Trump, nominee for the Republican Party in 2016, is Gowron. He is turning a bunch of people off. He's going on political attacks that are nothing but disastrous. And a bunch of otherwise honorable people within the Republican Party, and keep in mind, I'm not a party member anymore. I'm not in the Republican Party. In fact, I was talking to my friend Mary, a woman I still know from Las Vegas this weekend, on the phone, and I was telling her how I'm not in the Republican Party anymore, and she was a little surprised, but it's true. I enjoyed talking to her. We talked for like 2 hours this week and a bunch of stuff. It was good. But a bunch of good, otherwise good, honorable people in the Republican Party continue to support him. Why? Because they're supposed to. Because they're supposed to. Not because they have, even though I know Star Trek is fiction, the loyalty that Klingons have to the leader of the Empire, Gowron, is surely more etched in stone than anybody in the Republican Party being loyal to Donald Trump. Surely. Because, the Klingon Empire, it's set up a little bit like a military organization anyway. You just follow what your commanding officer tells you. You have no responsibility to do that in the Republican Party. The Republican Party is nothing but a Rotary Club. It's nothing but the Knights of Columbus. It's nothing but the Shriners, something like that. It's some nonprofit organization together for a cause. That's all it is. You can come in, you can leave, you can vote, you don't have to vote, you can give money, you don't have to give money. There is no sergeant, there is no general, there are no commanders. It's you being there by choice. Well, you should know, not to give too much away, if you haven't seen it. I'd urge you all to watch it. You can find it online, or you can find it on Netflix. I'm sure Deep Space Nine. Tacking into the Wind, or you can just read the plot if you go to Wikipedia, if you want to just not watch the show. But eventually, with that conversation, Worf decides that, yes, he must do something. And at the next meeting where Gowron is hatching some new plan that's going to get a bunch of Klingons killed, finally, Worf stands up and says, no, that's not going to happen. We're not going to do that. And because he challenges Gowron, they have to fight. That's the Klingon way. And what happens is Worf ends up killing Gowron. It's a good fight, but Worf, a little too tough, beats Gowron, stabs him. And what happens is then the Klingons are in the room, want to make Worf the new leader of the Klingon Empire, but Worf instead gives it to this general who has been embarrassed to that point, whose name was Martok. He's a one-eyed general who plays a great character, a great character in the last season 6, season 7 of Deep Space Nine. So he gets to be new leader, and he's a lot smarter. And he makes better choices and wants to work more with the Federation and the other planets, other civilizations that want to beat the Dominion. But all it takes is for one good person to stand up and say, here and no further, sometimes for things to change. And the problem that we had, or Republicans now had, in the nomination process is that nobody really did that. As much as I'm a Ted Cruz fan, and he was friends with Donald Trump for a little bit, and then started giving Donald Trump a hard time to the point at the end that Donald Trump was saying that Ted Cruz's father was involved in JFK's assassination. But there was no person, I think back, was it during the McCarthy hearings where, I forget who it was now, and I should have written it in my notes, but somebody out in front of that committee in the 1950s finally just said, "Sir, have you no decency?" And historians will note that was pretty much the beginning of the end of the McCarthy hearings, even though I realize that the McCarthy hearings exposed quite a bit about communism in the United States. But it just went a little too far. And finally somebody said, "Have you no decency?" And that's what never happened. Because everybody, I think, was as we've seen since then, too many people are too eager to just fall in line. For whatever reason. The Hillary Clinton reason, because they really do love Trump. Whole bunches of reasons, even though these people otherwise are honorable people. But they will show respect for somebody who is obviously dishonorable. And like in Star Trek, like in Deep Space Nine, it was Worf who figured out, you know what, Ezri's right. If a guy like me is going to continue to support Gowron and he's taking us the wrong direction, that probably means most people are going to do it. And that means that, yes, the Klingon Empire will get destroyed. And I don't want that to happen. Well, we just have too many honorable people honoring a dishonorable man. So I got to go to the break. You've been listening to America's Conservative Podcast.
The voice of American conservatism. WRS Digital, Red State Talk Radio.
And we are back at America's Conservative Podcast. I want to talk about Star Trek and comparing it to the current state of the Republican Party for a couple more minutes. The important point in Deep Space Nine was that Ezri Dax told that to Worf because the fear was that if the Klingons continue to get decimated in these stupid attacks that they were conducting, that if they were to lose all of their warships, that then the Federation trying to fight against the Dominion would become weaker. It wasn't so much that losing the Klingon Empire was bad, but the losing of the Klingon Empire would then exacerbate the problems that the Federation was having in fighting the Dominion in the first place. Meaning, with no Klingons around, it would make it easier for the Dominion to win. And so something had to be done, not just because the Klingon Empire had a right to exist. Here in political warfare in the United States in 2016, this is the point that I've tried to make before. It's not so much the point that the Republican Party has a right to exist. It doesn't. The Democrat Party doesn't have a right to exist. They're just, once again, they're just a bunch of people coming together for a common cause. But these organizations have no essential right to exist. These people can easily, all of them wake up tomorrow and say they don't want to be a part of the Republican Party anymore and go on their way. But the point I have made, and the reason I think that Donald Trump is so dangerous, is because he is tearing apart the Republican Party. The only large political organization with a framework through all 50 states that has the ability to combat what has been going on with Democrats for the last 50 years. It's not so much that I want the Republican Party to continue to exist because it has a right to, because it doesn't, but because I see it as the only good opposition to what happens on the left. Once again, when it comes to elections. Not necessary ideology. You can have ideology without having any sort of organization to put it all together. But when you have a political party, people come together with similar ideologies and they want to start winning elections, then something like the Republican Party is going to come together. It's going to start to exist. It's going to be created. And with a decimated Republican Party, the liberals will run rampant all over this country. This is the argument that I've made for the last year. It's not because I'm some Republican hack who just votes Republican all the time, feels a responsibility to do so, I'm not that way anymore. But I can't be part of an organization that's doing what it's doing. And I've tried to use this show to point that out. But my prime belief is that those Republicans who show up and show support for Donald Trump in 2016 are quickening the demise of the Republican Party. That's my belief. No different than Klingons who continued to support Gowron in Deep Space Nine. I know it's fiction, but I think there are a lot of other historical examples where this is true. We could even go back to, and I'm not comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. He is obviously not that. But going back to the 1930s with people embracing Hitler, even though at some point they started to realize, you know what, I think this guy's nuts. Many of them knew it. Now, in their case, the reason they continued to, probably because they thought they'd be shot otherwise. That's not going to happen in the United States. You can oppose Donald Trump and remain alive. And we also have our gun rights. So if anybody tries to come to your door and tries to murder you because you won't support Donald Trump, I suggest you get your gun out too. So even those Germans in the 1930s have a little bit of a reason, had a little bit of a scapegoat, a little bit, saying, well, if I don't do this, then me and my entire family is going to be shot. But, you know, given the way Hitler was, you're just surprised that more people didn't try to flee that country. Really. Instead of speak out against them. Now, a lot of them did, but there were still a lot of Germans left when the Allies came rolling in there in 1944, 1945. But they continue to support Adolf Hitler. Why? Well, it was just the German thing to do. He's going to do great things. And we can probably come up with whole bunches of other examples, even from Democrats, maybe embracing Walter Mondale in 1984. Guy had no chance. Of course, they could have run any Democrat in 1984 and probably would have lost. They could have resurrected JFK for 1984 and probably still would have lost. But they embraced the loser. They embraced the loser in Michael Dukakis in 1988. And then they got smart and changed their tactics with Bill Clinton. You know, I think the big difference between Donald Trump and, for example, Barry Goldwater, who got blown out in 1964, is that it was clear in 1964 that the Republican Party was going in Barry Goldwater's direction, his idea of what government should be. And he was just a little bit too far ahead of the curve. A little too far. He was unfortunately like the canary in the gold mine for all of it. It took almost 20 years before Ronald Reagan could continue what Barry Goldwater started. Whereas with Donald Trump and the Republican Party, he is obviously a one-off. It is obviously a cult of personality. He's not bent. It is not built on any sort of concrete ideas about government, about liberty, about rights, or anything else. It's not. And so the Republican Party is going to decimate itself because of a person. One person. It's pretty ugly. Pretty ugly. So let's move on to something else. And this next article being that, this next topic being that I wrote that article for thenewAmericana.com is another expression of that. See, a lot of conservatives getting crazy about this $400 million. I know I haven't talked about it yet, but was it a couple weeks ago or however long ago that this jet showed up in Iran, allegedly had all this money on it, and the belief is that this was a payoff to get hostages back, and the United States isn't supposed to pay for hostages because all that does is make Americans less safe around the world. People get kidnapped for their money, for payoff money. By the way, can you just imagine being the pilot on that job? I see pictures of this private jet. I don't know what kind of is it. I don't know what kind of private jet it was. Unfortunately, I wish I did know more about private jets because I'd like to fly in them all the time, but can't. Just imagine that pilot or pilot, co-pilot. I'm sure they might have had some guards on board. You got $400 million in cash. You just wonder why they couldn't wire transfer it, but that's maybe a whole different story. And this was money that was still in the United States going back to the days when the United States and Iran were friends, I guess. Just imagine those pilots with that $400 million, them talking to themselves, you know what, we could really, we could split it. I could do a lot with $200 million in cash. We could split it. Somehow, maybe we can turn off the oxygen in the back out there. We'll put our masks on, knock those guys out. We'll land on some deserted airfield in Africa. Never have a worry in the world. You just wonder if that went through those pilots' minds as they were flying over there. I think it would have gone through my mind, although I would never do something like that. I have to believe that it would at least cross my mind. Just saying. See, these are the way I think about some of these things. Now, there's a lot of outrage regarding this for good reason. As I said before, it doesn't take a genius to find out that when you start paying off people who hold hostages, that more kidnappings are going to happen. That's just the way it's going to be. Kidnappers, Iran, other countries that do this. This happens a lot in Mexico. People get kidnapped. Drug cartels kidnap famous people's children, and just famous people themselves to get paid off. You can see how paying these people off creates problems. But here's my belief. I think there's a lot of evidence to show this. First of all, I don't know how much the American people are really bothered by this $400 million or not. I'm not even sure how many people even know about it. That's just first. Second of all, I think the will of the people, getting back to that, might say that, yes, it's wrong for us to give money to get hostages back. That might be what the polling is, but here's what I know. Most people would say if their children, their fathers, their mothers were in a hostage situation, they would want the United States government to give Iran or whatever other country, terrorists, whatever money there is in the world to get their family members back. So the will of the people in a poll might be one thing, but in private, I'm sure it's exactly the opposite. Once again, this what makes all of these issues so difficult. Because how people expect somebody else to react or act is different than how that person would personally act in the same situation. I'm sure there's a lot of sociologists and psychiatrists who've written many, many papers about that over the years. And not even anything having to do with politics. So we as conservatives, we have to remember that. Is that I think even though we are outraged by it on paper, I think personally, a lot of us think, you know what? $400 million, we shouldn't do it, but yes, it's dangerous that we do that, but maybe we'll just do, this will be the, just like letting back at amnesty in the 1980s. This will be the last time that we make these illegals legal. We convince ourselves of that. And dare I say it, I haven't seen a poll regarding it, but I'm not so sure that the will of the people in the United States is that we shouldn't pay off Iran to get hostages back. I think a lot of people may look at it and say, you know what, $400 million, we can spare it. $400 million, Iran, not that their economy is the best in the world, but $400 million in the Iran economy is really not that much. We know that they fight terrorism. Well, we'll just have to be a little bit more safe. We'll just have to protect ourselves a little bit more. But what did those people do to get kidnapped there? Nothing. So if they should be back in the United States, and we should do what it takes to get them back. And if that means paying Iran off, that's probably what we should do. I'm going to say that there are millions and millions of Americans who think that way. Even though they understand that there are dangers involved with that. But they start thinking with their hearts, or let's just call it what it is, their emotions, instead of being sensible about it. And this is what happens. That you can have an administration that does this. And we'll get away with it. Gone are the days where even Jimmy Carter was going to allow, or tried to allow, and they tried to do it, but it ended up being disastered, a hostage situation that we had in the late 70s. And even he allowed the American military to try to go in there and do something. Once again, I know it was a disaster, but that is not even a consideration today. It wouldn't be a consideration. It's not a consideration in Barack Obama's administration. It wouldn't have been a consideration in George W. Bush's administration. And it would not be a consideration in Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump's administration. None of them. Even though what Iran did was wrong, whether George W. Bush or Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump loves or hates Iran, none of them would do even what Jimmy Carter attempted to do 30-some years ago, 36 years ago. That is how far we've come and far we've gone down. We're a long way from World War II, where, of course, sons of families in the United States were getting caught and held captive and POWs for years and years and years. And you know what the families knew? It's just the way it is. Even going up to Vietnam, you know what? John McCain, all the rest of them stuck in the Hanoi Hilton. It's the way it goes. It sucks, but that's what happens when, you're in a war like that. And it very well could have been that the American government could have paid off the North Vietnamese to get those guys back. Didn't happen. But here we are, so many years later, that we have a couple hostages over there in Iran, and we make a deal to get them back to the United States. Don't even consider a military possibility. And at least as far as we know. But given what I think I know about the Barack Obama's administration, how he loves dealing with Iran, military exercise is not going to happen. Now, would it happen in Syria maybe? We've had some reports about SEALs going in there looking to get hostages out or to kill this person. Of course, we know about Osama bin Laden and what happened there. But Iran, well, Barack Obama, he just loves Iran just a little too much. And Iran doesn't even have nuclear capability. I could understand it if it was Russia or China that were holding hostages of the United States, and military choice would not be considered. I could see that, but not in Iran. I know that they support terrorism, and that's horrible. But in the world view, going in their military to get a couple hostages out is a lot different than going into China, going into Russia, going into North Korea, right? We just see it as a difference. I would have liked to have seen something more along those lines for Iran, sending in the SEALs, kicking some butt. Maybe I'm just too much a child of the 80s. Let's move on to something else. But once again, one more time, I'm not so sure the American people are at all bothered by $400 million for hostages. I'm not convinced of that. That we as conservatives convince ourselves that the American people are bothered by that maybe is only fooling ourselves. Now, granted, we're right, but we have to know where the American public is on this. We shouldn't give them too much credit. The Olympics. watched a lot of it when I was back in Pennsylvania. Only watched a little bit of it once I got back here to Florida, mainly because I don't have cable or satellite, and anything that is sports that I want to watch, I have to find it online. A lot of complaints about how NBC covered the Olympics, the puff pieces, not showing some of the sports, too many commercials. I can tell you, I wasn't too much bothered by it, just the few days I got to watch it. Now, when I was in Pennsylvania, when all the swimming was going on, so there's a lot of excitement with Michael Phelps and Katie Ledecky and all that, all those other people, the relay races. And it seems like in the second week, it just maybe wasn't quite as much excitement, at least on the American side. America, I think, kind of dominated the first week because of the swimming and a couple other sports. But in the second week, Usain Bolt, the Jamaicans, and some of these other sports got covered. And it's sports the Americans don't quite do as well in, although the American women on the track did decently well. But I have to tell you, regarding the Olympics and the Russian doping, and I know maybe this is something maybe I didn't talk about enough leading up to the Olympics. Of course, I was gone. But there is no more sure sign that Russia is going in the wrong direction than all of the Russian athletes who were banned from going to Rio because of the doping that has gone on in Russia in the last few years, and probably going back to well before the London Olympics. Because when I think of this, I think back to the days of East Germany and all of those, of course, the Soviet Union and those Eastern Bloc countries that you knew that those men and women showing up for the games were all juiced up. And in fact, some of the women, because they were so juiced up, ended up becoming men. And I don't mean the opposite thing of what has happened with Bruce Jenner. Just because of all of the steroids and everything they took, their bodies actually started to change on their own. Really creepy stuff to me. I don't like talking about it. But the reason they did that is because they viewed the Olympics as a way to show how strong their country is, their countries are. That communism, socialism is the most powerful force in the world, and they had so much pride, so much ego, that it wasn't enough for their athletes to just show up to the games naturally and maybe win some, lose some. Those Soviet countries, or the Soviet Union, those other countries looked at it as if to say, we need to juice these athletes up because they are an expression of our country being strong, mighty, powerful, kicking butt on the track and field just like we would do in a war. That's why they did it. You come to today with Russia and its doping of its athletes and many of them being banned, it's the same thing. The reason this goes on is not because Vladimir Putin necessarily has anything invested in any particular athlete, but he and his country is so insecure that they can't allow their athletes to show up and lose because, well, that would make Russia look weak. When really it should just, I know as the United States, we don't feel that way. I mean, granted, we do great in the Summer Olympics. Winter Olympics, not so well. And we've had some juicing, but it's been in individual cases, not government run. We just look at the Olympics differently. But there's no sure sign that Russia's going in the opposite direction, the wrong direction, than the state doping stuff, showing they're going back to the bad old days. But I got to go. You've been listening to America's Conservative Podcast. I told you where you could find me at the beginning of the show, but you can email me at edwarddenzel@reagan.com. edwarddenzel@reagan.com. Find my books. Find my new show, Unfound. Go to edwarddenzel.com. And I hope you all have a great night.